a little early, you caught the end of Terrence's recommendation for the Champlain Valley. We're piggybacking on Mike's webinar because the timing is about the same for us, for a lot of us. I'll let Mike reintroduce Kerik and Monique, and after that, Terrence will wrap up with the Western New York thinning recommendations. So don't be afraid that you've missed something. And I'll also ask that Liz, you'll start recording on the cloud now, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Craig. And with that, thank you again, Terrence, for your recommendations. And with that, I would like to invite our next speaker up, Dr. Kerik Cox from Geneva, to talk about making sense of the weather we've had the last couple of days and looking forward to the next few.
Well, Mike, I don't know if we're going to make any sense of it because every time I come up with a set of predictions, they've changed. So everything I'm going to show you today is probably wrong now, regardless of when I made it. Even if it was right before this meeting, it'll change. But we can talk about what to do anyway. And what I've noticed as well as a lot of these different sites, as I'm going to start sharing, is that, let's see, we want to do two. Every location is a little different. Now, I've gone through a lot of different places, and interestingly enough, in generalization, you can have many sites in all the areas falling under a Western, Northern New York sort of type of thing. And sometimes they can look similar. A place in Ithaca could look like a place up in Mike's area, or even a place in Sodus. If you're too close to the lake, you might not even look like a typical Western New York place. You might look like a lake place. But we can talk about what to do. For the most part, things in these regions have been milder for scab. You know, we talked about it at Pink. We had some pretty hot and then like cold weather all throughout the year, sort of seesawing up and down. And we're still seeing that seesaw now. We're in the middle of the sea or the saw because it's pretty cold where it is right now, but I know it's going to hit 90 before I blink again, and things will get crazy. And so we've been having these sort of short bouts, hot weather, cold weather, no hard spring freezes except in a few places, low snow cover. We had a really rainy early season. Right around the time when everything was starting to, like, is that actually green tip? Do we have spores? I have tons of spores according to the various models, but at the same time I have no green tissue. But it's wet, so how are you going to put your copper and urea on? It can be really challenging in that regard. But we're past that now. So what are we looking like? It looks like a light scab season. Bunch of different options for ascospore ejection. And at individual different sites, you could have more infections than these big ones, or fewer, depending on what it is. But most places seem to have the really big infection events. Now, sometimes you just, temperatures and leaf wetness was right there on the edge, and it just didn't have enough to come together. Had a lot of ejection because of water, but it dried quickly, not giving it enough time to infect, or the temperature was just too cold. But now here's sort of where the big ones seem to be across most sites in all of these different regions. Was around somewhere between 5.2 5.4, blowing all the way out to 5.7, depending on where you are and how long the rain and leaf wetness lasted. Somewhere around 15 to potentially 30% ejection happening. And then we had another really big one recently that is sort of, depending on your new model, might still say it's ongoing. For Geneva, it says it's still an infection event right now, even though it's been kind of dry after that initial rain on 5.15. Talking kind of a big 30% ejection. Most areas are running out of ascospores, and you'll see that as we sort of look at some different predictions. But I think it's going to be light. It's been very sort of dry. I mean, yeah, we've had some periods, but it's been pretty dry so far. But what I will say is watch out for the storms in the secondary apple scab. One of the worst years we've seen for apple scab is when I went to the Western New York Petal Fall Meeting and it rained the entire time. And we're talking inches of rain. And I'm sure Craig and many others remember that. Like maybe it's 2019, but it just rained all the time. And it was and we had hardly any scab up to that point. It was one of the worst scab seasons ever. So watch out for any storms like such as the ones coming later in the week around this petal fall timing. Things get really susceptible. I mean, fruit are susceptible to thinning. They're also susceptible to scab and other nonsense that happens. If we get enough time, we'll talk about that other nonsense. So what are we looking like? There's our sort of early on west, depending on where you are, you can see it sort of waffle a little bit around that 2nd to 4th, 12, 14, picking on some sites. you know, sometimes it just wasn't enough to get a lot of leaf wetness. But if you look at the whole blob, it's like, yeah, it's a ton. No, there's a lot of leaf wetness. You know, it could have been really light, like it's shown on this Lake Champlain area, but it was enough to do the deed. Not a lot of rain on this Western New York site, a lot of rain. And we're sort of waffling around like that. This is what the newest one looked like at many places, a lot of wetting. So I think in many cases, if you don't get enough drying, and like such as in this Lake Champlain site that's predicting that, you know, this thing is just going to keep going when we get the rain tonight and just sort of last all week. Let's hope everyone was well protected over the weekend. But looking into the weekend, there may be a little bit of rain coming up as well. We're gonna have to see how that sort of plays out. And now let's talk about the scary stuff, the fire blight, because apple scab runs fruit, fire blight runs entire plantings. Yeah, it's been kind of cold early on, but now we've gotten some really steamy weather. Right in the in Eastern New York, they were sort of leaving the area and they had the big heat blast right at Petal Fall. And now we're in our hot blast that sort of died down as we're moving out of bloom and going into Petal Fall. We're having a cold bloom. And in last times, when we had pretty bad fire blight, we had this sort of really cold bloom period followed by a really hot, warm, dry Petal Fall. It's not something you want to do. And I think this is where a lot of the scary stuff happens. They've seen a couple studies looking at fire blight developing on flowers that have already sort of dropped, and particularly in this hot weather that's happening now. And some of the worst shoot blight is going to happen right at this period where it gets really hot. And boy, has it been hot. It's been in the 90s a couple days in Geneva. And I want to remind everyone that even if we don't get a lot of rain, it doesn't take much. Dew from grass, dew from humidity in the canopy, or even the water of an application they often talk about in Washington State being enough to do it. They are growing apples in a desert and they get tons of fire blight. So even if it looks dry, don't think that's how you're going to escape the hot weather and protecting against your whatever flowers are left on the trees. What does it look like? Yeah, sort of in the Western New York, Northern New York. I think it looks sort of a little bit like this for the most part. You know, a little bit different depending on where you are. Looks like, you know, we're going to get into some pretty, this is what it was in the old days, some really high, sort of really hot weather at Petal Fall, really cold bloom, as you can see. That's sort of the older times. And, you know, it kind of looked like, oh goodness. And so this type of thing, sort of that sort of scenario. And this is kind of what we're going to be running into in the next couple of days. Depending on where you are, a lot of places are showing some real hot weather around the 15th. We all experienced it. I did all my inoculations of fire blight trials right around this time so I could really kill my trees. And now we're in the slump. You know, it's going to die down. But look, it's coming right back again. And you'll be at the tail end of Petal Fall. There'll be rat tail bloom. There'll be young varieties. There'll be new plantings that are out of sync. And it's going to be real important to finish strong as we move into it. And this is kind of what it looks like now compared to that other one. Still a reasonably cold first bloom, but, you know, we're in this sort of end period and things can get pretty crazy. So if you spend a lot of strep up there, probably not the best plan, but, you know, you really want to hit this peak. I'm kind of worried about this final peak right there. It shows the rain here, not a lot coming, but I think as we creep into the weekend, some new rain is showing up. And that's what I said. No matter what I come up with now, it's going to change. Some of the sort of the new rain type situations are happening, and it's probably good to be important with it. Check on it. It's going to be hot over the weekend, rain on Sunday. Make sure you're protected through the last bit of Petal Fall, rat tail bloom, any storm Sunday, Saturday night, Sunday morning. If you're conventional, I'd say finish strong with strep. If you happen to have blister spot susceptible varieties like New York 1, Fuji, some of these other things, you know, maybe you want to go to Kasuma. Kasugamycin does work really well on blister spot, but strep doesn't. While you still got a flower on the tree, you're still good. You cannot use it after Petal Fall. Organic, good time for Blossom Protect. As soon as this rain stops on Thursday, be a good chance to get that Blossom Protect out there and get that levels built up on the flowers. Don't put it with a fungicide. There are some you can use, but for the most part, you know, as your tank mix is getting complex, you might want to just try to get that individualized application if you have susceptible organic varieties. And do this Saturday, maybe early Sunday, to be careful. Watch that rain though. Do you need Regulate right now? I would say as long as you're finishing strong with a good application of strep, save the Regulate for your thinning and keep the Regulate use depending on your thinning recommendations. I think Terrence is saying no Regulate in with your thinner because you might overthin in this hot weather. Don't put it in there for the fire blight. You're going to get a reasonable enough level of control without it. Pretty hot spring. We've had some really hot weather. We got some more 90s weather coming in the Finger Lakes. It's going to get pretty intense. Make sure that you don't let the shoots get out of control. This is where the shoot blight will hit you. So maybe that's 6 ounces per 100 of Pro-Hex. Or if you have a really young block, you can do this trial. It doesn't seem to impact shoots at all. We've done some trials here all over the state, looking at 2 ounces of pH and 1 ounce of Actigard. The Actigard itself was initially marketed for like herbaceous crops and annuals like tomatoes and things like that for bacterial diseases, and it's going to work really well on succulent shoots. So if you have a lot of young shoot growth, you don't want to slow down your young trees too much, you might get some pretty good bang for your buck with Actigard. If you got a big old standard tree, unless it's got a lot of vigorous growth, you might not see anything from either of these products. And I suspect they might work like any other PGR when it's going to be hot and you're going to get that activity, you're going to get better action from them. So in that case, you can kind of apply them with thinning Rex. All right, what's happening next? Okay, now that the petals are off the trees, this is where things are going to get serious. You're going to have small fruit. The potential for injury is really high, particularly with materials like Captan. If it's a cold, rainy day, the potential for Captan to injure in a complex tank mixture is very high. At the same time, these other things are going to be coming up. Glomerella, that's your Marsanina. Any of these things can happen. You might get some bitter rot, particularly if you're in a more southerly area where it gets warmer. And same as you sort of move towards the southern part of West or a little bit further south, you could start to see, maybe in the Capital District area, you could see these other things showing up. And these are where these nice fungicides come in. I don't think we're going to get a lot of really wet weather, so you probably don't have to worry about Captan injury or Captan injuring big mixes. But Captan is phytotoxic, and this is where these other materials, like these Group 7s, can just hit Marsanina and Glomerella. They can, the Group 11s are really good against stuff like bitter rot and everything. The 3s are good against fly speck sooty blotch in your summer. All of these types of other organisms often start infecting around petal fall. And if you could hit them with your fancy products, this is where you'll just really sort of get your best foot going. In many studies we've done, we're just going to put these materials on a petal fall and first cover and do no summer sprays and see what we get. And that's almost been as effective as a full summer program with Captan. So really, keeping things clean early on around your thinning time is very good. And I'll go ahead. Let's see what we have. We got one more. Maybe we'll put that in there. Yep, your SDHIs, your DMIs, and your QOIs. Rotate all 3 of them. That way you'll never get resistance to any. And if we do get heavy rains, that means probably should put something else on. If it's been super dry and it's a drought and you're worried about water in your crop, probably extend your summer covers all the way out to 21 days for the most part. And I always like looking down the list of the various Group 7 fungicides and seeing which ones have a really low PHI. Many of the BASF products have very low PHIs, and put this on right before the team harvests it and grab a little bit of post-harvest disease protection as well, because they often have 0. And with that, we'll go ahead and end this little share.